The voice said, "Cry." And he said, "What shall I cry? All flesh is grass, and all the goodliness thereof is as the flower of the field. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, because the Spirit of the Lord bloweth upon it. Surely the people is grass. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of our God shall stand forever." The path of enlightenment continues. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm glad for it. And the recent revelations have been concerning the past. I think one of the most interesting aspects, or one of the interesting aspects of Castaneda was a certain point when Don Juan, the sorcerer, is able to see an event that has occurred in Castaneda's youth as a young boy, in which he has given a promise, a pledge, that is somehow obstructing his progress, is making him unfree. It's an extraordinary story. Of course, it could be just a story. We have no proof, but I tend to believe them. And Castaneda was unable to recall. Don Juan noted that there was an event in his past, that he was under a promise and he needs to free himself from it. And Castaneda just racked his brains. He could think of nothing. And then Don Juan reminds him of articles of clothing and certain aspects of the scene that suddenly Castaneda is able to reconnect. And of course, he can't understand, as we can't, how it is possible that a sorcerer in the south of Mexico could have that awareness of events which had happened, years before, I don't know, 30 years beforehand, in a completely different part of the world. But so it is. And what I've found, I'm reminded of this because the same thing has occurred to me, although I'm not an apprentice and I don't have a sorcerer to consult. But I've noticed that certain events have been brought up in my mind, events in my past, just episodes which have remained with me for many years. And one incident is from the time when I would have been 10 or 11, an interaction with a friend at school. We would have been, yes, no more than 11, perhaps less. And again, there was a sense of incompleteness. Another event with an older friend when I was in my early 20s, and I stole his girlfriend. And I've always remembered that. I did steal his girlfriend, but you can't steal girlfriends, really. I mean, she just preferred to be with me for some unfathomable reason. And that has come into my mind as well as being something that is somewhat obstructing me. And another aspect this morning, I was thinking of my relationship with my older sister. I have two sisters, and my older sister died as a young woman. She was, youngish. She was hardly 60. And I feel some disappointment, of course, although my sister and I were not close. Since I was a boy, she seemed to have disdain for me and would not really interact with me very much at all. There was, as children, just one time when we were older, she called me to come to my mother and father's house when they were away, and she was involved in doing some cleaning work, and I helped her with it, and we had a day together, the first and only time in my life that I recall something like that. And she took me up to the pub. I don't think I had a car at the time. I think it was in the period when I was visiting England from Italy and setting up my company and hadn't yet decided to return here. And otherwise, the relationship has remained somewhat an enigma to me. Um, it's hard for me to understand what her problem was with me, except that, maybe I was the younger brother, and it's just ordinary sibling rivalry. She was in some respects, she was um, didn't fit with the family in that she was more elegant. She had none of the um, meanness of person that my father and my mother also seemed to have. My mother and father were quite proud, but they were proud of their poverty and appearing poor almost. Whereas my sister had an eye for the finer things of life, and she was always dressed very well, and she had an eye for increasing her position in the world, and I think she did that. She married a fairly wealthy man, and they lived wisely, and she bought a beautiful house, and her life was blessed in those regards. And I think she felt a little bit ashamed of her family sometimes, perhaps. My father was, he had no time for for the world, as it were, of finery. He was like my mother. Both of them were very envious people of others, and any attempt to show that one was refined or genteel or well dressed, they would oppose it, because I suppose they saw people who had more money than they did who were doing it better. We had a side of the family that was more well to do, and my sister favoured that side of the family. And she formed an alliance, I think, with that side of the family more than with the rabble, I suppose. I was part of the rabble, I don't know. So my relationship with my sister, again, is something that seems to be grasping me, gripping me from the past. And there are a few other events, minor things, that I have the same feeling about, and I'm revisiting them. And I'm trying to get release from these things of the past. And I think remembering them and understanding them is how release occurs. It's surprising that we can be held by an apparently random thing. It seems to be worthwhile, a worthwhile exercise to go through one's mind and take any of these events that come to hand, come to mind, and make our peace with them somehow. It strengthens it. I felt angry that my sister had died. I think she shouldn't have died so young. She should have lived longer, and I'm sure my younger sister also is disappointed at her early death, because they were quite close, she and my younger sister. And my younger sister found herself alone in the world in some respects. So I wondered why she had been so exposed to death, because death stalks us all. And we think it's just a random occurrence, and perhaps there is some truth to that. But in the world of sorcery, death is described as a force that strikes the person continually, strikes the other reality person, in which the person is represented by a kind of cocoon of light. So it's in a spiritual world. And this cocoon is constantly bombarded by, I don't know how to describe them, as though boulders were being hurled against it by the confusion of the world around. And this is the force of death coming into the life and trying to break through. And eventually, by striking continually like a wind, it will ultimately prevail, and it will manage to create a crack in the outer cocoon. And once the outer cocoon is cracked, then it can enter. And as it enters, then the cocoon is opened, and then this is the release for the spirit of the person. You could say it's just a metaphor, but it's intended as more than metaphor. So death is constantly stalking us. Our death is stalking us, and we have a responsibility to form a resistant barrier against it. And I'm not talking about merely matters of health, although of course health is important, but it's also a spiritual defense. We have to have continuity in our spirit life in order to defend ourselves against this onslaught until the time is ripe and we decide to die. And I think a decision like that should not be taken so young. My sister was not yet, was just 60 years of age, and it was an unhappy circumstance because after a lifetime of dedication and work, she had finally found the house of her dreams, and her husband was about to retire, and they were going to enjoy a glorious countryside retirement and enjoy their grandchildren. But it was not to be, and she was taken off to hospital with a headache and never came home. So the past can inform us and can strengthen us against the travails of life and the travails of death. Of course, it's the Lord God that really does strengthen us. And this is perhaps what was lacking in her life, but it's lacking in many people's lives. And just because somebody doesn't know God doesn't mean to say they won't live many years. That's not, there are other aspects to it, obviously. And death, of course, is not defeat. It's in a way, it's victory, because Jesus Christ overcame death for us, and he teaches us how we can die and yet become as a grain of wheat, which will then germinate and a plant can come forth from it. And this is his description of death in the Gospel of John. God bless everybody.